Last month, we celebrated Easter Sunday, a day of great victory. In fact, the greatest day of victory that the world has ever known. A victory over sin, a victory over evil, a victory over death itself. But unfortunately, at the time that it happened, not all of the disciples realized what a great victory it was. When we talk about Jesus' disciples, we tend to mainly focus on the 12 main disciples, sometimes called the apostles. The ones that we think of gathering together with Jesus in the upper room. But we need to remember that there were perhaps hundreds of disciples of Jesus, even in those early days. Men and women that believed in his teachings, that came from miles around to hear what he had to say, some that even followed him around. They weren't as famous, they weren't maybe as key as these 12 that met in the upper room. But they were still part of this group that followed and believed and worshiped Jesus. And it's many of this larger group of the disciples that perhaps were the last to believe that this victory over death had occurred. Maybe they believed that Jesus' body had been stolen. Maybe they believed that it was just rumors that were coming out of Jerusalem. Some of them would have been confused and frightened. Some, like the two disciples that we encounter in today's gospel lesson, simply didn't know what to believe. They were part of this larger group of disciples. They were hearing these rumors and stories, but the only thing that they knew for certain was that Jesus had been put to death. All the rest were whispers and gossip. All the rest were things that they hoped for and prayed for, but perhaps couldn't bring themselves to believe. And so as we encounter these disciples this morning, they were depressed, upset, and confused. They were upset because they didn't realize the great miracle that had taken place on Easter morning. And because they didn't know, or because they didn't believe, they were still without hope on that Easter afternoon. There are many people in the world today who are sad for the same reason. There are many of us that have lost hope. Maybe it's because we've lost hope in governments to protect us from threats like the pandemic. Maybe we've lost hope in systems that allow the rich to flourish and the poor to suffer. Maybe we've even lost hope in God for allowing any of these things. For most people out there, they're without hope because they never knew to have hope in God at all. So here we see the disciples from Emmaus leaving Jerusalem to go home. Now, Emmaus was a village about 7 miles from Jerusalem, and this seems like a fairly insignificant distance to us today, but it was a decent hike for these people traveling on foot. And so these disciples had a nice long walk home to think about the crucifixion and the death of Jesus. The last thing that they expected to do on that walk was to meet Jesus. Luke tells us that Jesus went and traveled with them, talking with them, but they were kept from recognizing him. Just like so many of us today are unable to recognize God's works in our life, The disciples were unable to recognize Jesus when he walked up to them, when he talked to them. Maybe there was something supernatural about it, but I like to think that maybe they were just too lost in their own grief and their own misery, too caught up in their own troubles to recognize who was walking beside them. But whatever it was, this man that they did not recognize began to talk to them, and he asked them why they were so sad. And they told him about Jesus, they told him about his trial, and they told him about his death. Little did they know how much their lives were going to be changed on that walk this morning. So let's look at this walk, and let's look at what Jesus did with these disciples, the hearts of these disciples on the road to Emmaus. We're told that first of all, Jesus mended their broken hearts. Luke says that as these disciples journey home from Emmaus, they begin to talk sadly of recent events. And it's during this sadness that Jesus draws near to them. He does this for us as well. When we're sad, when we're grieving, Jesus draws closer to us. He longs to comfort us. He desires to bring us peace. And the conversation of these two disciples reveals that their broken hearts were very much like ours. We can all recognize times in our lives when our hearts have been discouraged. Discouraged by constantly getting beaten down, constantly being disappointed by those that we love. Our hearts have been depressed by the pain and the sadness that we see all around us. Depressed at the seeming lack of hope and justice in the world. Our hearts have become resigned to this constant injustice. And the words, "life isn't fair," have become the motto of our lives. But there is good news. Because Jesus is the mender of broken hearts. And see how here in the scripture, Jesus begins to mend their hearts. He walks with them even though they don't recognize him. He asks them what is wrong. And then he begins to draw the hurt out of them. What things, he says. You know, sometimes the first step in healing a broken heart is just to tell someone how that heart got broken. Holding our pain and our depression inside doesn't allow us to heal as we need to. We need to be able to tell someone else about it to properly process it. Now, I know that there are some people that just aren't comfortable telling someone else their problems. But this is why God is always here for us. God is always ready to listen. We can always take our problems to him through prayer and meditation. We just have to admit both to God and to ourselves that we are broken, that our hearts are broken, and that we need help. And once we do this, Jesus can begin to heal us. For he is the healer of broken hearts. Secondly, we're told in this scripture that Jesus restored their wandering hearts. Now, these disciples had once believed in Jesus. They had once believed that he was the Messiah. And yet here, just a few days after his death, here they are, and all they can do is say nice things about him. They had expected miracles. They had expected him to free Israel from the Romans. They had expected miracles, and yet now they were doubting the greatest miracle of all. They doubted his resurrection. Verse 25 takes it a little farther and says that they were slow to believe. Because just like us sometimes, they had wandering hearts that morning. Sometimes this wandering happens in an instant. One traumatic event can cause us to lose our faith. And that's what happened to these disciples. Luckily for us, we have a shepherd who won't let us stay backslidden. Jesus worked hard to reach out to these disciples and to restore their wandering hearts. And he does so by going back to the scriptures, by talking about Moses and teaching them about how all the scriptures spoke of the Messiah, spoke of him. One way that our faith can be restored is to take in the Bible, to go back to the Bible, to read what it has to say about grief, to read what it has to say about troubles. And then we take what we read in the Bible and we apply it in our lives. We use it. We let it transform us. And only then can we be restored from our wandering state. Finally, the scripture talks about how Jesus set their hearts afire. After they realized that it was Jesus who had been walking with them, they said, "Were not our hearts burning within us?" Didn't our hearts burn within us as we walked? Didn't our hearts burn within us as he opened the scriptures to us? Why did they finally open their eyes? When did they finally recognize that it was Jesus? And we're told that was when he broke the bread. When they saw his pierced hands, their eyes were opened and they saw the truth. And it says that it was in that moment that their hearts were set ablaze. And they went out into the world to tell others. They went out to discuss with their friends and with other Christians what they had seen. We need to have burning hearts among believers. We need to have people that are so fired up with the Spirit that they are willing to run out and tell others. The few verses after our scripture this morning show what these burning hearts did for these disciples. It tells us that it made them change directions. Instead of finishing their journey home or going home, it sent them back out into the world, back out to the place where the disciples were gathering. And it can make us change directions too, sending us in the direction of God and the work that he had for us. It made them seek other Christians to meet with them. And finally, it made them a blessing to others as they went out and told other Christians what they had seen, therefore strengthening their faith and making their hearts a blessing to others. The past few weeks, I have to admit that I have been very much like these disciples on the road to Emmaus. As I've been reading the news about the rising cost of living here in this country and around the world, about the apocalyptic predictions for food prices that are going to take place this autumn, according to the Bank of England, and that lack of hope climaxed this week when I woke up to read a story about yet another elementary school shooting back in my home country. And I only realized how much hope that I had lost when I read that story and then just moved on to the next one. It didn't register. That's how low that I was feeling. It was only whenever certain parishioners came in and began to ask me how I felt about it and how I was dealing with it that I realized how low I was. And then I got angry. I believe that we deserve better. Whether it is children suffering by poverty here in this country and throughout Europe, whether it is children dying by bullets in the States or bombs in the Ukraine, I believe that we deserve better. Now, this is not a political thing. If you're listening back in the States, I don't care if you're a Democrat or a Republican. If you're here in the UK, I don't care if you're a Tory or a Green or any of those things that are in between. If you are listening from Russia, I don't think we have anyone from Russia, but you only have one party there, and I think that's a big part of the problem. But wherever you are listening, I think we deserve better. We deserve politicians that are looking out for the common people rather than the billionaires. We deserve leaders that are willing to step up and say no more death, no more violence, that we need a better world. We deserve better. Oftentimes we think about coming to church, about coming to Jesus for comfort and reassurance. And notice that that is what Jesus did with those disciples on the road to Emmaus that morning. He gave them hope. He gave them comfort. But he also fired them up. And he sent them back out into the world to spread the word and to make the world a better place. Their hearts became fired up. And I think that it's high time that the church today do the same. That we tell the world, that we tell our parliament, that we tell our Congress, that we tell our rulers, no matter what country they are in, that we deserve better than what they are giving us. We deserve a world of peace. We deserve a world of justice. And it's time that the church joins in the call to bring about that world.